got connected. So I am going to go back to the basics now. We have talked about systemic therapy. We have talked about the complex cases and the complications associated with VKC and allergic eye disease and the surgical management of eye disease. Now, when usually we have a severe case, we don't, the diagnosis is not usually an issue because if they have cobblestone papillae or they have giant papillae and they've been treated for VKC for a long time, usually diagnosis is not in question. It becomes about therapy. But most often what we see in our clinic are mild to maybe moderate disease, which can be a little confusing, and I'm just going to talk about very basic, how to differentiate different kinds of diseases and what are the conditions that can mimic ocular allergy. So allergic conjunctivitis can be often overdiagnosed because there are a variety of conditions that present with similar symptoms of congestion, phimosis, and watering. The predominant symptom that we need to remember here is itching. More than giddiness, more than watering, what they come to us is with itching. So the conditions that I'm going to talk about are the conjunctivitis subgroup. They can be confusing and they might look like ocular allergy and vice versa. Then we have the dry eye disease. Flick-Tenler conjunctivitis is another important differential because that also usually presents in younger population. And then we have episcleritis and a rare differential of ocular cicatricial pemphigoid or mucous membrane pemphigoid, which can be a differential diagnosis for atopic keratoconjunctivitis. So let's start with viral conjunctivitis. It's going to be a very clinical presentation on how to differentiate these disorders in the clinic. First and foremost, these patients usually will complain to us with irritation, foreign body sensation, watering, more than itching. So the predominant symptom usually here would not be itching. And if we ask these patients, they'll typically tell us that there's stickiness of lids in the morning. When they wake up in the morning, there's some amount of crusting. There might be associated with edema when we examine them. And unlike allergic conjunctivitis, it usually first involves one eye and then spreads to another, whereas usually in allergic eye disease, both the eyes are involved in the same time. When we look at the lower fornix, we might find discharge, which is again a little unusual in allergic diseases, and there are more of follicles than papillae. There can be associated signs which can help us in diagnosis. They might have membranes and pseudomembranes, so it would be worthwhile to avert the upper lid and take a look and see whether they had any membranes and pseudomembranes associated. They might have subepithelial infiltrates, which are very, very typical of adenoviral conjunctivitis, and preauricular lymph node involvement along with upper respiratory tract symptoms, and fever would also indicate towards a viral disease. Bacterial conjunctivitis is fairly easy to diagnose and is very, very rarely confused with allergic eye disease because they have copious amounts of discharge and membranes. Another important condition is that of toxic conjunctivitis. It could be a drug toxicity because of the multiple drops that the patient has been using, or the preservatives in the drops, or even plant extract like calotropis. These patients usually don't have any discharge in the lower fornix, but they have this congestion, which is more common in the lower fornix and the lower tarsal conjunctiva, whereas patients with VKC would have congestion more in the superior fornix or the superior tarsal conjunctiva. And all the signs would be inferior. They might have inferior SPKs and inferior caudal edema as well. Let's talk about now the dry eye group. So more commonly what we see is uveitis and blepharitis. So it is important when a patient comes to us with itching, watering, giddiness, we need to take a look at the lid margins, and a lot of these patients, younger patients, could also have blepharitis. So that is something which is an important differential for allergic eye disease, and they might present to us more again with complaints of irritation, burning and watering rather than itching. So looking at the meibomian glands, which also help, and they might again have associated signs like inferior SPKs or marginal keratitis, typically seen at the area where the lid margin touches the cornea. So these again would point towards more of a dry eye group rather than allergic disease. So I would just like to share an interesting case here of this 3-year-old boy who had been treated as ocular allergy for quite some time, for about 4 weeks or so, and he kept complaining of itching and watering and redness. So he had gone to a couple of ophthalmologists and he was treated again for allergy without any relief in his symptoms. So when I examined him, we need to take a closer look at the lid margin, and he actually had pediculosis. So Demodex and pediculosis again becomes an important differential. So we actually took him to the OR because he had a lot of pediculosis. We removed all of these, and this was followed up by tea tree oil treatment. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. A dry eye, to differentiate dry eye from ocular allergy, is that usually they present in older age group. The age group might be different, although we do have adult onset VKC. And they again present more with grittiness, dryness, burning sensation associated with intermittent blurring of vision. So most important to differentiate dry eye would be to look at tear film breakup time and the ocular surface staining, the pattern of the staining. So SPKs would be more common in the indal palpebral area rather than the superior cornea, because in VKC that's what we see. And associated filaments are also unusual to find in patients with VKC. If we have findings in the superior conjunctiva, it could be looking at superior limbic keratoconjunctivitis. So this is a 67-year-old female patient who presented to us with symptoms of irritation, dryness, and grittiness. What happens here is that there is bilateral inflammation of the superior conjunctiva, and there is redundancy and thickening of the superior conjunctiva as well. There can be associated papillary reaction, and filaments are usually again seen superiorly here. So this is something you need to keep in mind, that we might be looking at a case of superior keratoconjunctivitis, but these are usually older patients and they have associated thyroid abnormalities. A rare differential is that of floppy eyelid syndrome. This is typically seen in male obese patients who have a tendency towards sleeping face down, and they develop these SPKs and reaction only in that area on the side which they are sleeping. So if they are sleeping on one side, you'll have it more in that eye than the other eye. They have very, very lax upper eyelid tarsus, which is easily averted. So when they are sleeping, the tarsus gets averted, and they might develop SPKs because of the exposure that they have. Now, flictendial keratoconjunctivitis is another important differential, because this usually presents in the younger age group, and it is usually unilateral, which would help us in differentiating from allergic disease. And if we stain, we'll typically find an isolated nodule on the top of the flicten. So that would help us in differentiating this disease. Episcleritis usually presents with mild discomfort. Patients very rarely complain of itching. They would just come with redness and mild discomfort. It's sort of a painless congestion, and there are no associated papillae and no associated follicles. And the last differential would be the ocular cicatricial pemphigoid, which is seen more commonly in elderly individuals, and it's a bilaterally progressive disease. They have severe dry eye, they have cicatrization and symblepharon, corneal foreshortening. So it could be an important differential for atopic keratoconjunctivitis, because if you have a severe AKC, these findings might be present in AKC as well. So this is something that you need to keep in mind, and these patients would require systemic immunomodulatory therapy. So to conclude, how do we narrow the differential diagnosis? First and foremost, if it is not itching, it is probably not allergy. So if you have itching, we are looking at ocular allergy. If you have more of a burning and ocular irritation, we are probably dealing with dry eye. Lots of times, dry eye and ocular allergy are confused in a way that one could be treated as the other. So this is one very simple symptomatology-based differential. And if we have any kind of discharge, whether it's mucoid discharge or just pseudomucinous discharge, then we could be looking at conjunctivitis. So this is a decision tree. First of all, if there is ocular itching and redness, yes, then we are looking at allergy. If no, then we need to consider an alternate diagnosis, and maybe it is a mimicker for ocular allergy. Next thing we need to do after we've asked the symptomatology is to look at the lid margin. So when we look at the lid margin, we need to concentrate whether this patient has pneumonitis or blepharitis. If yes, then treat accordingly. Does the patient have any skin manifestations? So what we can ask these patients, sometimes because of this allergy, they might have associated asthma, or they might have skin findings. Or they might have allergic rhinitis. So we need to ask them symptoms of allergic rhinitis, whether they have frequent sneezing, whether they have any skin lesions, whether they have any asthma. So all of these supporting findings would again suggest that we are looking at an allergic eye disease. Is the patient a contact lens user? If the patient is a contact lens user, we might be looking at GPC, and that is one history which should not be missed. So that could just be contact lens induced GPC that we are looking at. Skin manifestations are more common in patients with AKC or atopic keratoconjunctivitis. Again, rhinitis, asthma, like I said, would be important corroborative finding for us to strengthen our diagnosis of ocular allergy. VKC, as discussed in detail, can present with all of these symptoms, so that will help in diagnosing VKC. And the last but not the least, you might have irritative conjunctivitis just because of the environment pollutants, which is quite common in Delhi. People typically tell us that we have shifted from a town, from a smaller town to Delhi recently, and we've had a lot of itching and a lot of irritation. So this is just probably the environmental pollution and smoke which is irritating the eye. So that will be the last differential. So that is the end of my talk. Thank you so much for your kind attention. And if you have any questions, we have a couple of minutes. I think we can discuss, or if the panelists would like to add anything. Yes, ma'am, please. Yes. So you said you are giving periocular tacrolimus. Yeah, so that also works because it does get absorbed to a certain extent, and so you just ask them to apply it on the eyelid. So I think it does get absorbed, but probably not as potent as it would be when you're asking them to instill inside the eye. And also sometimes they have sort of, I've seen a few patients where if it is applied on the lid margin, it does not happen with all patients, but they develop a little bit of skin excoriation and redness in that area. So that's not my preferred, choice of giving it as, but maybe the other panelists would like to share whether periocular would be a good.
Yeah, with tacrolimus, no, there are some pharmaceutical preparations which are much better tolerated than the other. So you need to try them out and see, which your patients or, which ones are better. I don't want to put any commercial names here across on this, but there is a lot of variation in the tolerability, that is one. The second thing, as Dr. Ikeda rightly said, was, that generally when we tell them to put ointment, they just put a 2 centimeter strip or whatever, strip of ointment into the eye. So we just tell them to put less than a drop. Some of these tacrolimus are just like a gel sort of thing. So you put a very tiny drop which is just enough to spread into the eye. So then they probably, and tell all patients that it's an irritant molecule, but it is a safer molecule than a steroid, so we have to try it and purchase with it. So over a period of time, most patients will start accepting it. If you don't tell them, then they will call you within 12 hours and tell you, this medicine is causing too much of problem. So once you have warned them in advance, probably they might be able to better accept the situation. But of course, some patients may not tolerate. It also depends on the activity of disease. For example, if you have a very inflamed eye and at that time you want to use a molecule which is very irritant, it will trouble them more. Once the inflammation is relatively controlled, maybe with a steroid or some milder surface steroid, once the eye is a little quieter, maybe they might tolerate at that point a little better, because the irritation of the or the inflammation itself has settled, so the tolerance may be better. So you have to keep trying, because transdermal you can use, but again on the skin also some people will say that it causes burning on the skin. It will be having some effect. It's better than nothing.
Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes, please.
Hello. I generally use lubricant drops prior to it, or if it is irritation is more after that, after 2 to 3 minutes after installation. The patient gets quite good relief. And 2 to 3 minutes, when you put methyl cellulose or any lubricant, that will not wash out the effect of earlier one.
Totally agree with you, sir.
My question is regarding the giant papillary conjunctivitis post-contact lens use. If you get a patient in a clinic setup, so I would like to know from the dais, how are you going to counsel this patient? Because these people are invariably wearing contact lenses for long periods of time. So obviously it is not going to settle down immediately post-treatment. And I have also encountered cases where, they they are so cosmetically aware of their looks, they are not willing to give up the contact lenses. So what are the options we can counsel them for, and how do we go about it?
I think the counseling regarding, you're asking that if you have a patient with giant capillary conjunctivitis secondary to the contact lens users, then how are you going to counsel them for not to use the contact lens in future? That's what you're asking?
Both the treatment and how long is the treatment going to continue?
Treatment is very start. Whenever you have giant capillary secondary to any insult, you have to remove the insult first. So obviously you have to counsel not to use it, otherwise you will have the same issue. Then you have to treat it. Treatment will be like ciprofloxacin injections and along with other therapies. It works quite well there. Now regarding the what we have, I have seen one patient such. What we have done in that, like after the activity of the disease has settled, for what she was using contact lens, suppose she is using contact lens for myopia, then you give a definitive treatment for the myopia so that she doesn't use it. So you can counsel her to, do a definitive treatment for the myopia in form of the keratotactic surgeries and all. But for doing keratotactic surgery, she has to, her eye to be white. Like, for making the eye white, we can give ciprofloxacin injections and other stuff which is available.
Yeah, so I think I would agree with Dr. Alok. These patients who are very conscious and they have been using contact lenses. So as with allergy and as with contact lens induced GPC, the most important task that we have at our hands is counseling to make them understand that this is what is causing their eye to worsen, and they would have this repeated episodes and they'll have to keep coming to the clinic. So asking them to stop contact lens becomes a very important aspect, and we have to really explain it to them and maybe click pictures. So what really helps me is that take pictures on the slit lamp, use slit lamp photography system, and show them once they come to you, show them what the picture is really like. And once you have treated for a while, once you have stopped contact lenses or you've given any ciprofloxacin steroids or whatever therapy you have started, show them the picture again and show them how it is improving their eye and their ocular health. So this, taking the photographs and showing them at different visits really helps in counseling. And once the eye is quiet, I would agree, I would offer them refractive surgery and ask them to stop wearing contact lenses.
The other thing you can try is that basically the GPC is an allergic phenomenon to contact lens, possibly deposits or proteins build-up, whatever is happening. You can try either daily disposable lens, or maybe you could try them to wear it for shorter periods when they're actually actively working, and not use it for the rest of the time when they are just probably not actively working or they're in home or something like that. So something like that, modifications in their usage, either reducing time or replacing more frequently could also help. Many of these patients are actually, if you give 1 month length, they use it till their eyes start becoming red, and then they get all these things. The problem is once it comes, it keeps coming again and again, so you need to probably counsel them not to overuse and discard lens as per schedule, or use faster discard time so that the lens build-up of whatever deposits might also go down. Sometimes even I think change of company can help. Change of company can help. Different companies make different contact lens with different sheen, with different material and all that. So I think that can also be advisable. We can't afford the.
Once they start resuming their contact lens, once we see a regression in the GPC, what would be the protocol we would ask her to start wearing it? Will you say that we wear for 4 hours first, assess for 1 or 2 days, and then increase gradually every hour per day? Or what is it going to be like? If she has to.
You can't hear exactly. You are asking protocol of managing GPC?
No, sir. Just in case, if the GPC is completely regressed,
yes,
and the patient insists on continuing wearing the contact lenses,
yes,
which ideally should not be.
Correct.
So is there a protocol in there we will define the hours which she's supposed to start with, like 4 hours per day to start with, then slowly, gradually increase every 2-3 days and to assess? Or is there some thing in that?
I think maybe we'll have to check with contact lens practice practitioner. Frankly, I am not in a position to answer that, but I think we need to look at reducing the wearage time, using some lubricant to, or antihistaminic drops can be given twice a day as a prophylaxis once the patient is better. But there may be a scientific protocol. I am not aware. I have not gone through the literature in that direction, but I think we can figure out, maybe talk to a specialist who do more lens work. Maybe they might have some protocol. I am not aware actually.
Hello. Sir, I would like to know about the role of ketorolac, olopatadine, lipotastine, and alkastadine in these allergic disorders. Thank you.
So we are getting a lot of ketorolac-based preparations in combination and in isolation. One thing we need to understand is all NSAIDs are toxic to the corneal epithelium. So if you have a VKC patient which is already having epithelium unhealthy, then I definitely don't use the NSAID on those eyes. The typical indication to use a NSAID would be in a seasonal allergy or in an adult with mild itching and conjunctival signs. You can use a combination of antihistamine with a ketorolac combination. But if the cornea is showing any form of staining or there is a more severe form of allergy involving the cornea, I typically avoid using the ketorolac. They also have surface anesthetic properties which might be helping, but they may be deleterious with patients who have surface problems and corneal problems. So mild allergy, middle-aged patients or coming with just itching and not much of any corneal involvement, you can try to use ketorolac. If you have to compare bipotastine, alkastadine, olopatadine, so there are studies which show one is better than the other. I think the problem is it's very difficult to actually in practice be able to get a feedback that this is working better. So I think if you have a patient with mild allergy, you can give interchangeably, maybe give them olopatadine. After a few months, you can ask them to use bipotastine, and whichever they find better, they could continue. Theoretically, we have studies that the newer drug is better than the older drug. Practically, whether it works that way is difficult to exactly figure out in a small practice or in experience-wise. But you can interchange the drugs and see which patient is better comfortable with.
In addition to what doctor has said, I think we should look into the pathogenesis of all types of allergic conjunctivitis. Whenever all types of allergic conjunctivitis, they are both IgE mediated, except VKC and AKC, which are in addition to IgE mediated, there is a cellular response also. Now, if you look at all these allergies, they work by two pathways. One is lipoxidase pathway and cyclooxidase pathway. So there is a formation of histamine mediators also, there is formation of prostaglandins and leukotrienes also. So if you look at NSAI, they act on only cyclooxidase pathway. They do not act on lipoxidase pathway. So the best way to offer to any person coming with allergy is to give the steroid, because they work on both the pathways if you really think so. So you have to understand that NSAIDs have a limitation. It can't take care of both the pathways by which an allergic response is happening.
So another molecule that works really well is the metoprolol sodium or the mast cell stabilizer, but it has become increasingly difficult to get it. I have had in past and even now whenever it is available, keep the patients on this for a very long period of time along with tacrolimus eye ointment. So both of these, especially for VKC, work extremely well, although there have been issues with availability of the same.
I had a couple of questions. One is, what is the experience, if any, of 0.01 and 0.05 and 0.1 cyclosporin, which is typically used in dry eyes? That is one question. And the other is, how do you access acetylcysteine? Is there anything which is available of it?
So So the commercial cyclosporine that we get is very useful if you have a very mild form of allergy. In the typical VKC patients, somehow you don't get adequate response. But once the VKC recovers, the child has grown out of VKC as mild inflammation, you can try the commercial preparation. Acetylcysteine we get injection form, so that can be diluted to 10 or 20%. You get 20% injection and you can dilute it to 10% or use 20% as a mucolytic agent if you have a lot of, in whatever condition that you want to.